Stacey Vigallon is here. She is our presenter, and she is the Executive Director and Environmental Education Director. She oversees the Nature Nexus Institute programs and also the staff management there. She leads community science programs, science illustration workshops, and also manages the Baldwin Hills Greenhouse program. She's a co-founder and co-instructor at West LA College, Conservation Studies, and she holds a BS in Wildlife Management from Humboldt State University. That's way north.
Now Cal Poly Humboldt. Yeah.
Cal Poly Humboldt. Oh. She has an MS in Wildlife Science from the University of Washington. That's even further north. And she completed the UC Santa Cruz Science Communication Graduate Program with an emphasis in science illustration. She'll be illustrating later. She received her education degree from UCLA with a dissertation focus on nature and transdisciplinary learning. We'll now start the program, and raise your hands on the Zoom if you have a question or a comment. Also raise your hand in person. I'm going to turn it over. We have a wandering camera, so I'm going to try to focus on the presenter, and I'll hear from my back channel if we have any issues with the video or the audio.
All right, and would it be possible for me to share my screen?
So we're going to give you the power to do that.
I think whoever's currently there we go. All right. And folks on Zoom, you can hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Folks in the room, you okay? Yeah. Okay, good.
We're no longer able to hear the presenter on Zoom. I can see mouths moving, but we're not getting any sound.
Oh.
I've unmuted on my side. Let's not do that.
Are we better now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. Gotta be careful how I touch the speaker.
Okay, I think we're good. I was going to say, I've always greatly appreciated how PV South Bay Audubon has jumped right into monitoring. You all have your own patch here. There's been volunteers monitoring since before there was a volunteer program. If you are a volunteer, like I saw a few folks on the Zoom who I know are very long time Plover monitors. We have a Plover monitor here in the front row. So the opportunity to get to speak at this chapter and then like sprinkle in some art nerdiness as well was something I certainly couldn't pass up. So I hope you all are feeling sort of game to do a presentation that the second half will be a little more interactive. So I'm going to sort of show you what you're in for. Always give this more, especially with adult audiences all the time. There will be sketching activities. Please don't freak out. There will always be someone in the background that sneaks out at this point. So I want to make sure that you all know what you're in for. I'm going to hand out art supplies now so that it will be really obvious. Just back clipboards. Oh, I'm minimizing chance of you want it to be like 35 minutes actually sort of put to the test here. If you're on Zoom at home, please grab a pencil and paper. I would say 3 or 4 pieces of paper. I'm sure Julian will make sure you get one.
Oh, sure.
Oh, you're prepared. You're a fellow. Excellent. There's one in every frame. Excellent.
Oh, he's there.
I was a good Girl Scout. I learned motto.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
Let's get the questions going around unless you brought your.
What are these names on the back of these?
It's just from working with students a long time.
So we can tear them off too?
Or you could just either way.
Yeah.
And I would say get maybe 3 pieces of paper. Did I miss anybody? And it's 2 people. And I highly encourage you to not use erasers. Let it go. Let it go.
No erasers?
No erasers. There might be some erasers working in that pencil box for this.
Okay.
I don't think anybody's getting hurt.
No, I'm sure.
Ragged Canyon. And this, I was trying to do rocks, that's hard. Also,
Rocks are very fun.
yes, it does not look good.
Oh, paper here?
Oh, yeah, but that's everybody's shape. This is me. This, that's-
Oh.
So.
For a quick word, you have it. Right. All right. Anybody missing supplies? We're good now? Okay. All right, folks on Zoom at home, I will take it on faith that you have your drawing supplies. So I work with a lot of student groups, like students of all ages from like grade 3 to medical school, and I find that it's very helpful to kind of manage expectations at the start of the presentation. So tonight, we're doing snowy plovers and least terns in Los Angeles, conservation and sketching. So I'm hoping to transition to where the sketching sort of comes into this. So tonight I'm going to give you the big picture overview of LA Audubon's Plover and Tern monitoring programs. Much of the content for tonight is pulled from the training presentation that it's volunteers multiple times a year. There'll be a sprinkling of Plover and Tern natural history. Definitely, I will be talking about the importance of community in conservation. And then we're going to transition to using sketching as a tool to develop good observations. So what this presentation is not tonight is this like really data intensive details about plovers and terns, trends from the past decade or so. I'm not going to go into that tonight. We certainly have that presentation sort of on hand. There was a fantastic paper that we got published earlier this year that really details the long-term data trends of plovers in Los Angeles and Orange County. I'm happy to send that your way. On the LA Audubon website, we also have past reports for both species posted. So if you want that like data intensive piece, the resources are certainly out there. But tonight was meant to be sort of big picture and transitioning into something that is very applicable to our daily lives as birders, so an observation practice. And this is not about how to draw birds real good. Like that's not the point of tonight. The point of tonight is drawing as a way to become a better observer. So if you already draw birds very well, great. If you have not drawn anything since second grade, you are still in very good company tonight. This is what the drawing activities are meant to be. It's not meant to be a high skill drawing activity. And just quick background on me, again, as a very nerdy person, my background includes field biology, science illustration, as well as education programs. So I have my dream job in that I get to do all of those things and activities like tonight, where we're sprinkling in the science, the arts, as well as an opportunity to maybe stretch and try something new that we don't already do. So hands up if you are a birder, consider like of any skill level, like you consider yourself a birder, as I presumed at an Audubon meeting. And then hands up if you are someone who has some sort of creative practice in your life. So it could be drawing, it could be music, it could be dance, culinary arts, so something, knitting, anything you do that's sort of like creatively oriented, whether you do that for money or for fun or for both. Totally. The slowest of the performing arts is what I've heard. So gardening counts as a creative practice. You paint with flowers, exactly. So hopefully you have a blend of things in your life that supports you in how you engage with it. And I think one of the things that's so great about a conservation program that gets community members involved is that it gets you involved in the ecology of your community. It helps embed you in what's going on adjacent to our dwellings and our buildings, or within our dwellings and our buildings. And so Plover and Tern conservation in LA County is definitely urban ecology in action. I think that's one of the things that makes it so interesting, is that you have an overwhelming people factor that you need to think about when you're working on these two federally listed species. So volunteers have been an essential part of Plover and Tern monitoring since 2007, and I would argue since before 2007. So there were a lot of birders who were very committed to regularly checking their patch for snowy plovers or for these terns. In 2007, LA Audubon got organized about how that information was reported and collected. So the goals of the Snowy Plover Monitoring Project were to do a coordinated survey effort 4 times a year. 2 of those surveys are range-wide, so they're aligned with what U.S. Fish and Wildlife is doing. We wanted to make sure volunteers could get instruction on bird ID and survey techniques and keep this very beginner friendly. So you didn't need to be, a shorebird expert or someone who's been birding for decades in order to jump into this. That like whatever protocol we developed was going to be helpful in terms of data collection, but also really, again, entry level friendly for people who were interested. We wanted beaches to be surveyed consistently year to year. We wanted to be able to coordinate with beach managers to increase protections and produce an annual report for beach managers and agencies. And there's no way we could produce that report without the work of volunteers being out there doing the surveys. Very much overlapping with the goals of Tern monitoring as well. So they both started in more of a formal capacity in 2007. Again, volunteers getting instruction on some bird ID and survey techniques. Monitoring nest chronology in particular for these terns was really important. So they're migratory. So they're arriving. When are they arriving? When are they initiating nesting? Tracking colony attendance, documenting disturbance factors and predation, and again, being able to coordinate with beach managers to potentially increase protections. But when you boil it all down, when you have this sort of community-based monitoring program for these listed species, you're basically asking, how many are there, even if the how many ends up being 0? Where are they, and what are they doing? And I should maybe add a 4th one, what's going on the beach around them? So having eyes on the beach in a more structured, formal way than just doing a casual walk on the beach and maybe making some notes. So there's a data form involved. And if you are new to these creatures, and I'm kind of curious, is everyone familiar with snowy plovers and these terms? Right. So you all know what they look like. So if you're a snowy plover, you're this big. As a grown-up snowy plover, you're quite small, fit in the palm of a hand. Sand-colored, small black bill, round shape. They look like a little Disney creature, shorebird, very high on the cuteness factor. If you're a least tern, you can fit in the palm of 2 hands. That's how I work with a lot of 3rd graders. It's very kinesthetic.
Well, Lee's Tern just signed my petition.
Good.
Look.
So gray on the back, black cap, yellow bill, sort of classic Tern uniform. It doesn't buck the trend in terms of looking like a lot of the other tern species that we have around. And I'll talk a little bit about the federal listing and which biological units are listed. But thinking about the big picture, where are these species? So snowy plovers, they can be found along the Pacific coast, Gulf Coast, as well as some inland areas. Western snowy plover, we're looking at our coast, and the biological unit that we're focused on for monitoring and that is federally threatened is the Pacific coast population. So we've got the little yellow dot, that's LA for reference. And so the Western snowy plover, that Pacific coast population, those are the guys found on the orange line. So Washington on down the bottom. These terns, again, also as a species found beyond our coastline. So Pacific coast, Gulf Coast, Atlantic coast, as well as some inland areas. The California least tern subspecies, that's the biological unit that we're focused on monitoring, and that's the one that's federally listed as endangered. So they're found from San Francisco on down to Baja. So considerable overlap seasonally with the snowy plovers. So it's a great 2-for-1 if you're a community-based volunteer and you want to get involved in monitoring locally. In terms of migration patterns, we end up here in LA County hosting a lot of wintering snowy plovers. So our numbers start to increase in, really in September, January. Those are our big plover numbers. So you've got plovers that might be from Central Coast or as far north as Oregon, hanging out with us for the winter and then dispersing again during the breeding season. Or we potentially have plovers that stick around all year and maybe attempt to breed. So there's small movements, relatively small movements compared to some of the big migrations we see in other species. So least terns, they're on that orange line in the spring and the summer. In the fall, everybody migrates back to Central and South America for the fall and winter. So if you head out to the beach today, you could potentially see a snowy plover and a least tern on an LA County beach. If you head out to the beach in December, a very high likelihood of a snowy plover, almost no likelihood of a least tern. If you saw a least tern in December, it would be very sad and lonely and lost. They should be not with us in the winter. In terms of habitat, what they need. So both of these species rely on sandy beach. And already, if you're new to shorebirds or seabirds in Los Angeles, and you think about a bird that relies entirely on sandy beach for their whole life cycle, you can see why they would have some conservation issues in LA County. In terms of where they're at here, so if you want to go on a snowy plover birding foray, you'd have good luck at Zuma Beach, Malibu Lagoon, Santa Monica, Dockweiler, and here in Hermosa. Those with little stars by them, those are the sites that have some kind of protective enclosure, either permanently or seasonally. And I know that there's talk of potentially looking for a site here in Hermosa as well. The photo that's here, this is Santa Monica Beach, and that's the pilot restoration study done by Bay Foundation a while back. But it does get used by plovers as well.
How close to the actual water are they more a little bit away from the beach, or they're right there?
They're right there. So they love to forage along the rack line. They love to use the beach. Having some dunes is really helpful for potential nesting sites. So I'll talk a little bit about that soon. Least terns in LA County primarily found in 3 places. So Venice and Marina del Rey, just faintly see right below the yellow dot, like a little tiny blurry rectangle. That's the enclosure space. That's where most volunteers do their monitoring sessions. They also potentially nest at Malibu Lagoon. So we've had successful fledging of least terns and snowy plovers at Malibu Lagoon. And so we also have maybe a smaller group of volunteers who spend some time out there. And then least terns are also found at the Port of LA, but the Port of LA is not publicly accessible. So that's usually done by only biologists as opposed to volunteers. What do they eat? If you are a snowy plover, you are the T-Rex of the rack line. You are out there hunting teeny tiny invertebrates, so beach hoppers, sand and kelp flies, sand crabs, that rackline area is really rich biologically. So you've got the input of the kelp coming in, you've got all the invertebrate species that rely on that kelp as primary habitat and food, and then we've got the predators like some plovers and other shorebirds that are out hunting the invertebrates. These terns largely focused on small fish, very aerodynamic. So they're cruising over waterways, they're looking down, they're looking for really small fish here on our coast. Northern anchovy are a favorite. You all are familiar with terns, but when I talk about this to folks who are native birds, I have to tell them they're not like an osprey. They don't have these like magnificent talons. They've got these like adorable, stumpy little webbed feet. So they fly to the surface, pluck the fish out of the water, and fly out. They also don't swim around under the water with a pump chasing the fish. In terms of nesting, for a lot of people who aren't birders, this is big news. The idea that birds nest on the ground can be like a real mind-blowing fact for folks. So snowy plovers and these terns are ground nesters. They make their nests directly on the sand. They tend to be minimalists, so not a whole lot of construction going on. These terns in particular, it's sort of a shallow scrape to depression out. They might use an existing footprint to sort of scrape out, but very camouflaged eggs that go directly on the sand. And in terms of natural history, how they raise their young, snowy plovers are really interesting in that both male and female incubate eggs. Incubations, like 3 to 4 weeks long. Once the eggs hatch, the female takes off to start a new nest with a different male, and it's the dads that raise the chicks. So chicks are ready to be up and running within hours of hatching. The parents don't provision the chicks, rather the dad protects the chicks, takes them down to the rack line, teaches them where to forage, how to hide. And so then you have these like cute little puffballs running around with one parent on a beach that potentially has a lot of people on it. They can move a mile or more away from the original nest site. So you've got 2 months of very vulnerable life cycle phase for these guys. They're so cute. They're ridiculously cute. These terns are a little less mobile when they first hatch. Both parents incubate, both parents provision the chicks. When you spend a lot of time at the tern pond, you see a lot of dropped fish on the ground, and that's often because parents have brought back too large a fish for the chicks. So if you're a teeny tiny chick, you need a teeny tiny fish. So these guys tend to have 2 eggs. They sort of park it in the nest for a while, and then once they get a little more mobile, they hide under vegetation. The pattern on their back just renders them invisible under that vegetation. So you've got silver beach bird, and you might have chicks hiding in there, and it's really difficult to see them. So they're very cryptic when they're still cute and fuzzy. But you have to go from being this adorable little puffball to being capable of full flight within just a few months, because they are migratory. So you can have the greatest habitat on the beach for them. So their enclosure area within that chain fence can be looking magnificent. But if offshore resources aren't good that year, it's going to be really challenging for them to actually have a productive year. If you're a little bird, you have a lot of predators. So they range from things like birds of prey and raptors to native mammals and to some of the non-native species that are lurking amongst us, like dogs and cats. Off-leash dogs can certainly be an issue for beach nesting species. In Venice in particular, our biggest predator is crows. So crows tend to be very focused on the egg phase of nesting, and they take the eggs out in the pack. So it's, again, very challenging to be a small beach nesting bird, particularly in Los Angeles. If you're a snowy plover, the name of the game is camouflage. So eggs are sandy colored, chicks are sandy colored, adults are sandy. So really, their goal is to not be seen. A lot of new volunteers ask me if plovers ever fly. They do totally fly, but they don't want you to see them fly. So they tend to be really cryptic in how they move as well. So this is one of my favorite activities to do with an elementary school class, is to have them guess how many snowy plovers are in this picture. And I'm wondering if maybe we should turn the lights on. Does that help with that?
Yeah, that's, yeah, at least have a little bit of life skill
Great.
for emergency reasons.
And for drawings.
Yeah, well, I'm already
Mine is-
drawing stuff already.
Good.
Well, you know what I'm drawing? This is petitions, like a petition example.
What's your guess? You got guess for 13, 12. 25. Any other guesses? The big reveal. For 17. And it's interesting when you're, this I think was a photo that I took at Sealand Beach. So I'm always taking like good example photos for training opportunities for volunteers. And often when you're surveying and you find the flock, you'll then see a jogger go right through. The jogger will have no clue. The jogger will run right through. So rather than like pigeons where you make a big flapping sound and you're up in the air and you're very flamboyant about your escape, the plovers tend to just sort of creep away. Jogger goes through and then they creep back. Something like an off-leash dog, that's when they're up and flying away and then go several hundred yards or meters away from their original spot. But for something that they view as a potential threat, but not quite so scary that they got to fly away, they'll creep away. And then they creep back after the joggers. If you're a least term, there's definitely some camouflage going on. So egg phase and chick phase, very, very cryptic on the beach. But then once you're an adult, you molt into that Tern uniform with black cap, gray back, white front. And then I would say safety in numbers is your biggest strategy for avoiding predators. So they tend to nest close together. They're colonial nesters. And I have to admit, these are technically not least terns, but you get the idea. So if you're in a big area where there's a colony, that means there's a lot of eyes looking out for predators. There's a lot of mouths to warn, and a contingency of terns can go chase off a potential predator. It could also be argued that migration is a strategy to avoid predators. So in an area where you originated, maybe predator populations increase during spring and summer, and so you sort of evolve the strategy to escape them over time. So conservation status. The Pacific Coast population of the snowy plover is federally threatened, and I believe they've been listed since the 90s. California subspecies of the least term is federally endangered, and I think they've been listed in some capacity since there was an Endangered Species Act. You definitely want to fact check me on the year, but they've been listed for a very long time. And I think understanding sort of what happened is an important part of understanding conservation strategies. So envision a beach hundreds of years ago. There were absolutely people here hundreds of years ago. The Tonga, the Chumash, other local tribes were here hundreds of years ago. They are still here today using beaches. But we didn't have the intense level of development and the high population that we have now. So hundreds of years ago, plenty of room for plovers and terns. A site like Malibu Lagoon would have supported both of the species. Early 1900s, you start to see some development, but still overall not that intense urbanization that we have now. But then in the 1940s, 1930s, 1940s, LA expanded quickly. So you had rapid urbanization. You suddenly had all of this infrastructure in a way that you didn't have before. And it sounds really silly to say this, but roads make it easy to get places. So beaches that may have been isolated were very quickly accessible. So you have more development in terms of permanent settlement, and you also have people visiting. Where people go, they like to bring their food. And so you've got this new biological input on beaches. So you've got the visitors, you've got all of the food that they bring, the food that gets left. This attracts predators. It also increases predator populations. And you simply have too much disturbance and too many factors going on for a lot of our beaches to support nesting populations of plovers and terns. And I think the statistic, and I think it's even increased recently, but 50 million people annually visit beaches in Los Angeles. So that's a lot of people on the beach. And it looks like this. Most of the folks headed out to the beach they don't have it in for plovers and terns. But I think the perception of why you go to the beach and what you do there and what the beach is for may not always align with what wildlife needs. And again, just looking at these photos, if you were a plover or a tern, it was time to nest. Good luck, right? If you tried to sit still long enough to be able to actually, incubate eggs, you would probably get squished. So I think when you think about rapid urbanization and you think about how the beach is used, there's some particular things that can be challenging to these two species. So predators are ever present, and a lot of the omnivorous predators, something like a corvid or a raccoon or rats, respond really quickly to human inputs, respond quickly to human food. It attracts them to spaces that they maybe wouldn't have used quite so heavily before. And also increases their population. So if you're a crow that's coming to the beach and you have access to a dumpster that wasn't there 30 years ago, you have the opportunity to potentially fledge more chicks and flocks get larger. This is a photo I took at Zuma Beach. It was like first light, and the crows were already hanging out on top of the food vendor, just waiting. They're very smart. Omnivores tend to be really crafty, so they know where their meals are coming from. There's also issues like disturbance, and disturbance is different than direct mortality. So this is something that can be kind of a challenge to explain to people, especially dog owners, where they're like, my dog has never caught a swimming pool. My dog would never be able to catch a loose tern. And the idea is like it's a presence of danger. So even if somebody's dog never actually catches the bird they're chasing, it's energetically expensive to be disturbed all the time. So joggers, people walking, off-leash dogs, all of the support services necessary to keep 50 million people safe on a beach. So you've got sanitation, law enforcement, all the lifeguard stuff. So if you're constantly running away from danger, you don't have the opportunity to forage. Potentially, you don't have the opportunity to rest. If you're a least tern and you've just flown hundreds and hundreds of miles, resting is really an important part of being able to actually reproduce for the nesting season as well. So you can't protect the nest, you can't find food if you're constantly running away. Also, a lot of our beach practices potentially remove habitat features. So Sandy Beach has its own plant community. So coastal strand plant community with plants that are adapted to live in the sand. On groomed beaches, all of this gets removed. Elements of the rackline might also potentially get removed. So if you don't have that rackline input, you don't have the invertebrates and you don't have a food source for some plovers.
Would you explain the rackline more in detail?
Sure. So the rackline is that space on the beach that it's really dynamic, shifts with the tides, so high tides and low tides, and it's the area where stuff like the trash as well as the kelp and the seaweed gets washed up. So that space is where you have a lot of invertebrate life, and that's the space that a lot of the shorebirds use. So they're reliant on it. Also the grunion. The grunion use that rackline area. The grunion's eggs stay in the sand for weeks at a time until the next high tide. So it's this really biologically rich, important space within a beach. And so when you remove the rackline, or you remove the plants that are mid-beach, or you remove potentially even the dunes that are backing the beach, you're removing key habitat features that these species need. And so this is where the community piece comes in, and the idea of communicating and connecting with our nature spaces. So I think seasonally, when people think of the beach, they think the summer fun, it's there for recreation, which is true. These spaces are vital green spaces for people's well-being in terms of mental health, physical health, spaces for people to be outside and connect to community. But I think the piece that's often missing is that this is also habitat. And one of the things that's been really exciting to work on these projects is that here in LA, we typically have great weather year round. So this is not Minnesota where you're gonna freeze to death in January. You can be out at the beach in January when we're hosting all of these wonderful wintering populations of birds. It's this really great opportunity to connect with a nature space and have the summer fun component maybe not be so prevalent. So the beach can be a really great place to explore the natural world year round. And that's where volunteers come in. So being part of a community-based science program, it's a great way to connect to other birders. It's a great way to better understand the ecology of the city that you live in. For students, it's a really wonderful opportunity to connect with older generations, to connect with very experienced birders, or to connect with biologists, or to connect with fellow students who are interested in potentially a career in conservation or biology. So it's been a really wonderful, and for me, in terms of being a volunteer coordinator and project biologist, it's been wonderful to connect with all of these community members. Birders come from all different backgrounds. So one of the things I love so much about birding is that people do it because they love it. It's different than being a biologist. Being a biologist is something that can be monetized, but I think if you're a birder, you're not always looking to monetize that. And so you get people who are from all different walks of life and backgrounds, and they converge because they love to spend time outside and bird. So I think that's been a really interesting part of the community-based science piece. Also, a big part of conservation for plovers and terns has been providing the public with opportunities to see their beach in a new way. So we frequently collaborate with the Annenberg Community Beach House in Santa Monica over the past decade or so. So we offer beach walks for the public, where I often, at least once a year, I offer a sketching opportunity at the beach, and I fold in a lot of beach ecology and smooth plover-centric knowledge. So a beach walk gives people the chance who would never necessarily think of themselves as birders. It's not necessarily a activity they identify with, but they would really love to bring their family out to an ecology walk. And so that once you've seen your beach as habitat, it's really hard to unsee that. If you see a snowy plover for the first time and it's your first time using binoculars, it's a very memorable experience. And so it's something that they then have a better understanding of what is the beach for. That little tiny orange line on our map, that is plover habitat, that's tern habitat. The terns aren't gonna head to the Angeles National Forest because that's who can see the beach, right? The beach we have, that's the area that we need to protect for humans and make it accessible as well as the wildlife. So that's a big proponent that we add to any sort of beach walk, is like understanding what a space is for.
Question.
Yeah.
Are there any other species that nest at the beach?
Killdeer. Killdeer. Well, we get killdeer nesting in the Venice colony. I'm trying to think, because a lot of the birds that we host in the winter, they take off for northern climes. They don't hang out and nest at the beach. So plovers and terns are in LA County, at least, the primary beach nesters in the small spaces that they can nest.
Killdeer are plentiful enough, so they're not threatened.
I believe they're considered a common bird still, and they're so ubiquitous. So they can nest on an empty soccer field, on a vacant lot, and on the beach.
They're not as dependent on.
Yeah. They're not. I wouldn't classify them as a sandy beach. And then sort of the third prong of community and conservation in Los Angeles is connecting with students, connecting with really young students potentially. So with the exception of the pandemic years, we've offered field trip programs for public schools. Because LA is so huge, it's entirely possible that you can make it to 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade and never have visited the beach before. So if you're a family who lives east of downtown Los Angeles and you don't have your own vehicle, it can be extremely challenging to get to and from the beach. So every time we do a field trip, there are 1 or 2 students, like, this is their first day at the beach, and they're there with their friends. They're having this like really positive learning experience. It underscores that school can be a fun place to be, that learning can happen outside of a classroom. And it is not hard to get kids excited about a cute bird. It is not hard to get kids excited to like look for cool dead stuff at the rack line and touch slimy seaweed. So it's this really fulfilling opportunity for students. They get to have lunch at the beach. It's almost all the schools in Los Angeles are hardscaped, right? There's very few soft places like the beach. During lunch at the beach, you can dig the biggest hole you can dig in 35 minutes. There's no limits. You can yell as loud as you want. You can practice cartwheels. You can do many things that you can't do at school. And so to tie that to the ecological knowledge that you learned in the morning makes for this really rich, joyful experience for everybody. So the staff who participates in these, the teachers, and the students. So it's always a really exciting opportunity. We sometimes have snowy plover volunteers who also assist with the field trip, so they get to see what that looks like for someone to look through binoculars for the first time. So it's really exciting.
Stacey,
Yes.
you know, as you mentioned about people who are currently living in East LA, they don't really get to go to the beach. Because actually right now they can if they take the metro rail. Because right now, since they just completed a regional connector project, they go from East LA all the way down to Santa Monica on the metro rail.
Yeah, new public transportation pieces are making accessibility much better.
Yes, that's the point, actually.
Approximately 35 years ago, I was working at a recreation center in Los Angeles, and I took a field trip. Took them to the beach. I get them to the beach, and I realized my cat that keeps and I go, oh my gosh. So I took them to the most calm part of the beach, and I stood in the water because I was in front of the lifeguard. I was shocked. These kids have never been to the beach.
We had this really great story from the teacher, and she worked at a school that was like Boyle Heights area, and she said when the bus got within view of the ocean, there was spontaneous applause. Like all the students clapped. So it's the energy on a field trip is really great, and I wish we could all retain that energy when we go on field trips, where you like spontaneous applause when you get to the parking lot to finally see that warbler that you've been wanting to see. So this is our inflection point. This is where we're going to transition and start thinking about sketching and drawing and what's the connection. So conservation, I feel, especially in urban spaces, is about helping people see connections. And sometimes that's quite literal. Like you actually see the plovers. I've got this photo here when I was doing a survey with new volunteers, and they walked right past the plovers, right? So helping people see what's there. And then there's the communication piece. So often with student projects, we not only do they get to go to the beach, but we might do a follow-up activity with them where we're going to work on some posters. The idea of sharing your knowledge is really important. And so drawing is a great way to communicate that. Thinking about words you want to use to communicate that with people who maybe aren't birders or don't have that nature connection. I think having an observation practice helps you see connections. And I think sketching and birding are both really great observation practices. So when you apply the word practice to birding, or you apply the word practice to sketching or drawing, it should take the perfectionism angle out of it, where it's the idea of showing up routinely to do something, even when it can be challenging, even when you don't quite feel like it. So I think the idea of an observation practice is sort of a good mind space to be as we start thinking about some sketching. So I think, because I know I'm in a room full of birders, I think that sketching can really help with your birding ID skills. And so it's less about making a beautiful drawing that you're going to show a bunch of people, and more about committing to a process. And I think just becoming a better observer in general, you're committing to a learning process. And I think perspective is everything. So as birders, we know this. If you're facing the sun, it will be very challenging to see what you want to see. And sometimes it takes that more experienced birder to tap you on the shoulder and be like, come over this way. And you're like, oh, and so everything kind of changes for you. And I think having an opportunity to change your perspective on an activity can be really useful and can be really enriching. So for both birding and sketching, my belief is that the process is more important than the product, and that your patience is rewarded. So as we work on a few things, we'll keep this in mind. For our purposes today, drawing is making representative marks on paper that correspond to what we observe. It does not mean drawing well. It means making your eye and your hand and your brain all work together. Birding, and I work with a lot of non-birders. I'm like, birding is just paying attention to birds wherever you are, whether or not you have binoculars. You do not have to have the binoculars to do some birding. If you're waiting for the bus and you're looking at birds and things going on, counts as birding. For both of these activities, you're training yourself to focus and notice things. And to put people at ease who maybe aren't regular drawers. People who are creatively or artistically comfortable, they kind of see a blank piece of paper as an opportunity. They get to be creative, there's freedom, they get to express themselves. If you were someone who was shamed in 2nd grade for your weird drawing of your dog, that might stick with you for well into adulthood. And so when you're presented with a drawing opportunity, especially if there's other people within view, you get a lot of fear, anxiety, failure, you're worried about your drawing being judged, and then you just don't even try. And I think acknowledging that and reassuring everyone that today's drawing is not about drawing well, it's about drawing this process. And also reminding people, especially if you're a veteran birder, new birders feel this too when they join the group, that if they don't have a handle on their shorebird ID, or they're worried that they don't have the best binoculars in the group and they don't have a scope, right? So trying something new, especially in more of a social environment, can be a little anxiety inducing. But drawing is not a magical power. It's a learned skill, like math or reading. When you practice math or reading, you get better at it. You may not be super genius reader, you may not be super genius math person. Nonetheless, you have a level of competency. So same with drawing. Drawing is just another way to communicate, and you can communicate a lot with really simple shapes if you need to, right? Sketching out a diagram or a concept can save you thousands of words, right? Instead of writing a whole page, you quickly sketch out your idea or thought. Sketching out a map for someone for how to get there counts as drawing. And so I think keep that simplicity in mind, the idea of communicating an idea quickly as opposed to spending 10,000 hours creating an amazing masterpiece. Those of us who really like to spend the 10,000 hours creating a masterpiece, great, but that doesn't need to be all drawing endeavors or all sketching endeavors. And I think it's really helpful because drawing forces you to slow down. It forces you to look closely. In creating an image, no matter how skillfully, the lines and tones on the paper are giving you ongoing feedback to where you have looked closely and where you have not yet looked closely. I really like to show this example of a 5th grader's work, and this 5th grader was not in drawing. He had soccer he needed to get to, so he was in a hurry. And he spent about 3 minutes drawing this dragonfly specimen. He did what I would call the waffle wings. He's like, whatever the lines, they just make the lines and I get out of here. I'm like, go back for 5 more minutes, look more closely, just spend 5 more minutes and do another drawing. And then this drawing number 2 was the second drawing. So he got it done, it was 5 minutes, but he noticed more because he went back and looked. So I think just using drawing as a way to get yourself to slow down, stop being in a hurry. I feel like a lot of our culture really makes us in a hurry. And so you have to fight against that. Drawing, I think, is a good tool for that, slowing down and looking closely. And birding is all about noticing patterns. So plumage, sound, bird movement, behavior, patterns of the landscape, patterns of bird use within the landscape, seasonal patterns. So that slowing down and looking is a long-term commitment to the process. And birding is so much more than what birds look like, but what birds look like is a good starting. It's a good starting point for that slowing down. So we're all very familiar with field guides. They're very addictive. whole bookshelf of them. Of course, you need them all. But I think taking some time with your field guide before you head out can be really helpful. Or taking some time with an online field guide all about birds, Cornell birds, excellent source of like the visuals, sort of like get your brain queued up for what you're gonna be looking at. So there's also the do-it-yourself version. So I work a lot with students, and we focus closely on field marks, which is what does a bird look like? What are the key things that you need to be this bird? And so as a third, fourth, or fifth grader, your bird proportions might be a little wonky, but all of these students really nailed the field marks on these. So if we had their field guide, it would still be really helpful for identifying birds in Los Angeles. As much as I love Sibley, like I still feel like the Politi field guide could help you out if you were new to Los Angeles and wanted to know what common birds were.
We did a good job.
They did, yeah, here's a close-up one. So just to compare and contrast of a fourth grader student drawing and a Kaufman guide. Again, if your goal is to figure out what's what in Los Angeles and all you had was Judith's drawing, which is a magnificent drawing for a fourth grade student, you could figure out what a California script is without needing to do the Kaufman guide. Okay, so are we ready to have our stuff? I've sufficiently padded this activity. People's anxiety level, hopefully no one will leave them. Uh-oh.
Why? I didn't want to interrupt you. Can I take this one? Thank you. Enjoyed it. I'm good. And I'm not chicken.
I believe you. I mean,
She'll go a long way.
so we may not get through all the birds I had planned. We'll see. We'll definitely focus some of our time on snowy plovers really closely, and we'll do some compare and contrast to sort of show how looking closely can help with IDs. But we'll call it at 8:30. Wherever we're at with our sketching, we'll call it 8:30. Okay. Priority. Give yourself permission to not be perfect. Ideally, you don't have any research. So your drawings will look weird. It's okay. It's okay that your drawings look weird. If you want to put it on the fridge at home, you can, but if you want to immediately put it in the recycle bin, you can do that as well. This is a process. Okay, unleash your inner third grader and just go for it. If you started something that is just not working out, just like do the next thing next time. So don't get hung up on it being good. So our first challenge is to just let go of the ID for a minute. There's really wonderful nature journaling, nature scheduling resources out there, some of which I've borrowed thematically from tonight. But let go of needing to name things, because oftentimes, especially as grown-ups, once you name something, you move on. Like that's a yellow-rumped warbler, and you move on instead of looking at that particular yellow-rumped warbler, seeing what it does. When you don't know the name of something, you spend more time with it. So try to shift that perspective. I think we've probably all met some shorebird chaos, especially when you're new to birding and you're like, they all look like wind-up toys. Like, how do you tell them apart? And it's the close looking, the looking at subtle differences. So as we go through this, we all know what a snowy plover looks like, but harken back to the days when you didn't, when you had to spend more time with something to really figure it out. You had to look at it more closely so that you could then idea the book. So we're gonna do a little page setup. So on one page, this is what you're gonna set up your page to look like. You're gonna give yourself 2 little squares for drawing. You're gonna give yourself some space to write 3 things you noticed. And that's the top half. On the bottom half, like change that, give yourself a circle instead of a square, and then give yourself a long list of things you're gonna notice.
And what are you drawing the squares and the circles?
It will be revealed shortly. So right, this is often what I do with younger students in terms of we're gonna set up our page. Help, no matter what you do, whether you're a biologist or an artist, taking a little bit of time to get organized, to sort of prepare your brain for what you're gonna do next is really helpful. So clearly we're gonna be listing some things we noticed. We're gonna be doing some small, quick drawings. And I gave you a few pages. So then you're gonna set, for our time frame, let's just do 1 page of these. So then you got half and half. You've got some prompts for yourself. I notice, it reminds me of, I wonder. These are very classic nature journaling prompts. I certainly did not invent them. So you want to prepare yourself for what you're going to do next. So a little space to use the language part of your brain, a little space to use the visual part.
Say that again, say that sentence once more.
So you're setting up pages to give yourself the opportunity to use the language part of your brain and the visual part of your brain. And this is very structured. If you're someone who resists structure and you brought your own sketchbook, do your own thing with this for sure. I find that a lot of folks who don't have a drawing practice or might be even new to the idea of like observing closely, they tend to like structure, but this structure may not work for you. So choose a structure that does work for you, but you want 2 pages set up. So one with a little circle, and then pick another page and do your half and half. And then give me a thumbs up when you're ready. You got your page ready. You all are much faster than most of the third graders. You're setting up your most.
We were at third grades.
You've got that experience very well. Good. Okay, excellent.
Now we only using one side of the paper.
You could use both sides. I always like to give people more paper than they need, just in case.
Okay.
So you're gonna do a Plover intensive. You're gonna do a compare and contrast. So the first thing you're gonna do, I'm gonna make everything timed. So I find when I use a timer and there's a ding to the timer, people respect the ding to the timer. They're like, oh, I guess I need to stop now. So we're gonna set alarms. You will have 1 minute to write down 3 things you notice about this plover in breeding plumage. It's fancy, fancy breeding plumage.
This is not drawing it.
You're not drawing it. This is the language part of your brain. You're writing down some things that you notice. So 1 minute. And you'll find you get into a rhythm with this. So our writing and drawing time to be short. So if you hate this, you only have to endure it for a few seconds. If you are a drawing perfectionist, you will be pushed to move on. You can't get hung up.
I noticed.
So writing some things that you notice about this plover in breeding plumage. So as fancy looking as a snowy plover gets. You have about 20 seconds left for your I notice. What I love about I notice is you can't do it wrong. If you're writing things you notice, then you're doing the activity perfectly. Final 5 seconds. Okay, so wherever you're at with I notice, now switch over to your little square, the one that's right above where you wrote what you noticed. You have 2 minutes to sketch this snowy plover.
So what are you doing the circle?
We're gonna save the circle for the next.
Okay.
And if you're someone who likes arrows and words, go for it. 2 minutes to sketch the snowy plover, even if it ends up looking like a weird cupcake or a different species entirely. I love doing this in the 3rd grade class because after about the first minute, you start to get giggles and then look at their neighbors. Even if you're really good at drawing, 2 minutes is entirely inadequate to do this well. Okay, you can't draw your bird particularly well in 2 minutes. Got like 1 minute and 10 seconds left. So if you've been focused on like the perfect eye and bill, you gotta move on, it needs a head, it needs a body. So 45 seconds left. I haven't been able to check the chat, so I don't know if there's been any questions or if the folks on Zoom can still hear us.
I'll check.
Make sure I didn't miss anything. Last 20 seconds for this photo. Judgment-free zone, right? Like judgment-free zone. It's just so hard to do.
Didn't see anything else.
Okay, so that's your drawing team. As a compare and contrast, we're now checking out this individual snowy plover in non-breeding team. So 1 minute to write down some things you noticed about it. It could be in the context of the bird and breeding plumage. It could be anything you notice and you write down, you are doing this correctly. So 1 minute to write some things you notice.
Is this your 1 through 7?
No, this is the second square.
Oh, okay, second square.
We'll do the circle one next.
So this is how I sketched them. I drew buildings instead.
You're in charge of your notes. You're totally allowed to draw whatever you want.
So then I sketched the buildings. Do you know where these are?
Don't.
They're in Norwalk.
Would not have guessed that.
That's because this actually was a building I used to work in.
So it was what was in the line.
Yep, I'll put down the name of it. Actually, I should have put down, I noticed, I should put down registrar, recorder, county clerk. I put down as one of the I noticed is registrar, recorder, county clerk. So that's where I work.
So now 2 minutes for sketching this non-breeding plumage plover. And we don't have colored pencils, right? So as you're working on this, add those labels and arrows, even if they're messy, to explain to yourself what it is you're seeing. So 2 minutes for sketching this particular non-breeding plumage plover. And as you're working on this, think about what's not observable. Like, we have no view of the plover's legs and feet. So if you've not seen a plover before, neither of these photos would answer the question, how many toes does a plover have, right? Like you have, in order to know, you have to observe it. And if what you got through the scope of binoculars is not giving you that information, you can't draw it, right? You need to be patient until the animal moves, or you find another photo reference if you're doing this online or in a field notebook, to get the information that you need to make that observation. About a minute left. All right. 30 seconds left. If what you end up with ends up looking more cupcake or muffin-like than pointy cactus-like, then you're on the right track. So I think we're ready for the circles. We're doing okay on time. So now we're gonna like broaden out the view of our scope, and we're gonna think a little bit about how are these particular birds situated within the habitat. So you want to maybe add some habitat elements. I would pick one of these. So don't aim to do both, but pick the one that calls most to you. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna do some noticing and then some sketching. We've got two very different activities for our Plovers here. So 1 minute of I notice. We also have different views of the Plovers, slightly different angles, so you're getting a different view on this field mark. You really see how the band around the neck is not connected. That's a key field mark when you're looking at some of the other similar shorebirds. 30 seconds left for noticing. So aim for more than 3. I think we put 7 in there. If you can get 7 in the next 30 seconds, great. If you can't quite make 7, don't worry about it. Last 7 seconds. All right. And then this time, let's give it 3 minutes, a luxurious 3 minutes compared to the 2, to situate your plover in a habitat. So you're gonna again make your plover smaller and make sure you're looking at some of these habitat features. If you're doing the one with the rackline, pick one plover to draw. Don't worry about it. Pick one.
Good thing. This is taken ladies.
I think the one with the tire track was the early one. I'm not sure time of day for the one
Long
with the
shadow.
It is a very long shadow, yeah.
So what was I supposed to write on the 7 things here?
Things you noticed about these books.
Okay, well, look what I did.
It's very detailed.
I did the 2 clovers right here,
They're part of the
the county logo. Do you see what I wrote? I just wrote recorder county clerk. I was going like this.
I like that you added the photos.
Yeah, well, I deleted these. I deleted these 2 and replaced them with the clovers. Or I said plovers, not clovers. I keep saying clovers, I don't know why I say. I think maybe that's what you've been saying too.
About a minute and a half.
Because I replaced those 2 with the plovers. So I guess maybe the 7 things we can start from. Okay. Registrar. Voters. Information. Recorder.
About 45 seconds.
Works. And then. Collection.
Final 15 seconds. All right. So now you need your second piece of paper. I think we'll do just one of these. Have you given our time? Are we up for doing one more? All right. So now we're gonna do snowy plover versus not a snowy plover. So comparing and contrasting birds that are frequently confused for snowy plover. So you've got your second page. You've got I notice, it reminds me of, I wonder, and then you've got your little space for drawing. So we'll just do one. And we'll call it. All right, so we're gonna focus on the same bird. If you're new to shorebirds, they can be really challenging to tell apart from snowy plovers.
Remember that?
Yes.
So let's take a minute and just write however many things you notice about the sanderling. And for comparison, I've got our little snowy plover in non-breeding position here. They're often side by side to see them when you're out at the beach, especially in the winter. About 15 seconds left for I notice. However many things you want to write down. However you want to frame it up, yeah. All right. So then the next thing is it reminds me. This is a really helpful prompt for tying something new you noticed about it to something that already exists in your brain. So even if you're like, it makes no sense, but it's reminding me of my 6th grade birthday party. It doesn't have to make sense, right? Like whatever you notice, whatever it reminds you of, and whatever you wonder about it, if you're engaging with those questions, then you're doing it right. So I would say don't worry about being super scientific, like whatever popped in your head when you're seeing this bird, you're like, oh, it totally looks like my uncle running. I don't know why, but that's what's coming in mind. Write it down, right? It's gonna tie what you've noticed tonight to something that's already in your brain. So give that like 30 seconds. Again, even if it's really silly. Take like another 10 seconds for Ramon. It's very stream of consciousness, this question. Doesn't have to make sense. So we're going to save I wonder for last, and we're going to start our sketch. So you're sketching this sanderling, and you've got 2 minutes. So the time crunch really focuses you on what are you going to pay attention to in terms of drawing, what detail do you have to let go. You can't draw every beautiful feather that you see, right? You gotta really jump in with like, what is making the sanderling look different than the stick? And again, arrows and words, go for it. Don't feel like it has to be, no word sketching. I find diagrams extremely helpful. About a minute left.
I finished. See, look, on this one, whereas I wonder, like, when will I get to be permanent? That's this one. Sorry, it says, I noted, registrar recorded second. It reminds me of elections. Because like on this one, let's see what I wrote on this. But this one is just like petition examples. And some of these who signed it. My other one fell on the ground. Okay, that's what I did. the two buildings.
You can tell that this is really on.
Yeah.
As you go through this, you start to notice if you're a heavily visual person, much more of a words person, or a both person. I tend to be a both person, where I start the drawing, I add some labels, I move on to other, where I like to have a lot of browser windows. Whereas some people like finish the drawing and then they do some writing about it, or vice versa. You are the boss of your notes, however you want to tackle that challenge. But I think the combo of the language part of your brain and the visual part of your brain is really useful when you're trying to absorb the information. So we'll wrap up with I wonder. And this is the part that I think as birders, we can get super focused on the idea and moving on. Whereas I wonder really pushes you to think beyond the idea. It pushes you to think about something, a question that you might have about this particular bird. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense. Anything you wonder about this bird is a valid thing to write down. So give yourself like 20 seconds. That's what I would love to hear what you all wondered about.
I wondered how hard it was to draw blood from that young because that's what I do.
Oh,
wow.
They seem like big fidgeters. Really hard to draw.
Look at that leg.
What else do we wonder? What other wonder things pop
I
up?
wonder how fast.
That's what I wonder.
Yeah.
They're moving.
Yeah. And are they dig
That profit margin, right? All the energy they spend for
from those
funds
long
and-
legs? Also, I wonder if it's trying to sand or force.
Mhm.
And he's. I wondered if he reacts more to the environment than the slow absorbers. Or more just, I think he's in the water. There's more active. Yes. Some more active.
You're the one that can do cool things because Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're very organized.
It's a second. Well, I wondered why he runs from the wave, something when I'm looking for sand. Something.
So it's interesting to see the variety of things that everybody wondered, and that's the ecology piece, right? The wondering is what connects your observation to the broader ecology, and I think one of the things that can get lost once we're adults is the wonder. And you're wondering sometimes very silly things, but it connects the knowledge that you gained, the observation you made, to something bigger than just looking at a photo of the sand dune in a shared room, right? The wondering piece is what broadens our ideas and scope beyond just the idea. I think given the time, we'll wrap up. Let me get to my last slide in case anyone wants contact information. I was going to keep us here forever drawing birds. But
I don't mind staying here with you drawing birds all the time.
it's fun. I think that it's fun. But I also know that if you're not someone who has a drawing practice, drawing is tiring. Observing closely is tiring. Like your brain gets tired and you need a break.
It gets better the more that you do it.
Mhm.
And it, it does take a lot of effort.
So there are, with the conservation project, there are always many partners. It's never a single entity that's working on things. So this is our very long list. Photo credits also go to a lot of people. If you want to get in touch with me about Plover and Tern stuff, I think the LA Audubon address is the best one. If you have drawing related things or you want to know something else about the other nonprofit that I work for, Institute, my other email. But I really appreciate you all, and hopefully folks on Zoom, you were able to catch all that as well. Jumping in with the drawing, give you a little there's some level of discomfort sometimes with doing that, but I really appreciate the opportunity tonight to hang out with you all. So
First,
thank you. We do a lot of activities in Baldwin.
Stacey, I'm glad that you put our chapter on the list. I was getting stuff.
Here's from this chapter, Jess has been surveying plovers since before I ever moved to LA, so. And Tommy and David Moody, like a lot of folks have been Plover folks long before there was a formalized program. So your chapter has been a big part of that.
And then on the back.
Well, thanks for joining us again tonight. It was terrific. I felt like I was back in the third grade again.
In a good way, I hope.
Yeah, not, well, I was sitting in the corner again, like I used to. Any questions about the presentation tonight or about upcoming events? Anything you're wondering? Want to share? Yes.
Do you have workshops, local workshops on this journaling kind of thing?
We actually this Saturday, yeah, at the Baldwin House, we're doing a nature station.
So it's the same as doing this, right?
Only outside.
But we're doing it.
Probably more like plant. It won't be at a space where there's.
What time is it?
If you go to the nature nexus.
What's morning or afternoon?
Morning, yeah. So like 9 to 10:30.
Are your activities featured on the NNI website? Okay.
Yep,
there you
so
go.
our account, we haven't plugged in the stuff for the rest of the summer, but the Saturday event is.
Okay. Okay, well, I don't see anything on the chat. We got a small crowd coming in virtually. Thank you for joining us, everybody who did. And yes, we can stop the recording right now.
Yeah.
And then we'll just continue informally.